Her victory barely absorbed, Margaret Thatcher set about choosing her first cabinet. There was a balance to be struck between the right and left wings of the party. With economic policy seen both as the priority and the dividing line, she made sure that economic departments were kept under control, with her most loyal allies getting the top jobs. Her first appointment was Geoffrey Howe as Chancellor. Many thought the job would go to her ideological mentor, Keith Joseph.
Keith Joseph was a very thoughtful, original, and in certain respects completely useless politician. So this was very good for her because he posed no threat to her, but he did constantly supply her with ideas and he got her to think about things. And one of his great skills was to find interesting people who had ideas about economics, trade union reform and so on. And he encouraged, through a body called the Centre for Policy Studies, which he set up with her assisting, all this the power of ideas, to mobilise the power of ideas.
Economic teams in place, the next surprise appointment was that of Jim Pryor as Employment Secretary. A close ally of Edward Heath, he had also forged good relations with a number of trade union leaders.
But on the other hand, we've also got some pretty nasty pills to come, because one of the things that's happened over the last few months is that a number of decisions in shipbuilding and steel and coal and in other heavy industries have not been taken.
Mrs. Thatcher wanted to reform the trade unions and employment practices, and the only argument was over how fast she could do it. She reckoned that the unions would be prepared to deal with Pryor.
Jim Pryor was actually sympathetic to the unions. I think he felt pragmatically that if you wanted to make change in industrial relations in Britain, you couldn't do it with a big hammer.
Of other notable appointments, Willie Whitelaw became Home Secretary. Although one of the old guard, he became Thatcher's right-hand man and the person who advised her on how to run the country and on how to present policies.
He could contribute very little in the way of policy ideas. He wasn't that sort of man. What he could do was give shrewd judgment about political situations, and he could deliver opinion. He could reach bits of the Tory tribe, which Mrs. Thatcher couldn't. And he did that loyally and skillfully, and in a way which combined sort of apparent bumbling with actual cunning.
Elsewhere, Michael Heseltine was made Secretary at Environment, Peter Walker was given Agriculture, and Lord Carrington was appointed her first Foreign Secretary.
Mrs. Thatcher understood very well when she came into office that she was in charge of a coalition, in effect, and that she had to get the balance of power right. And though she was a woman of strong beliefs, she was not an ideological maniac, so she well understood practical politics. And she also, if you talk to people who were there when she was trying to select the cabinet, she did not say, is he one of us, does he agree with us on everything? That wasn't the way she thought about it. She thought about their skills, their experience, the overall balance in the party.
Cabinet appointed, now it was time to set about the job of change. The first announcement came just a day after the Queen's speech. Michael Heseltine informed MPs that local authorities would be able to sell council houses to tenants for at least 30% below the market value.
The whole policy depended on a discount being given. I remember Margaret being quite iffy about all this. Not at the cabinet meeting, I wasn't at the cabinet committee, but I was privately picking up that she didn't like the idea of people being given assets at less than their full value. And she had to be talked into agreeing to that. And it was Peter Walker who was the real enthusiast. Peter Walker at one point actually wanted to go further. Peter, left himself, would have given them away.
We do happen to think that spreading ownership and giving people the opportunity to own their own homes is a major central policy of the Conservative government, and we cannot allow local authorities to sort of frustrate the views and the wishes of the British democratic process.
It had a tremendous impact, the plan to sell council houses to their sitting tenants. There's some dispute over who should get the credit for it. Michael Heseltine, who was at that stage, I think, Shadow Secretary of State for the Environment and had just gone into the government, claims it was his idea. I think the more loyal supporters of Mrs. Thatcher would dispute that and say, no, it was the Prime Minister's. But be that as it may, the fact is it had a tremendous impact. And I remember a very bright Labour MP at the time, Brian Walden, saying to me, this is going to be lethal to us. It's going to be lethal, Tony, I'm telling you. You know, what it's going to do to us in those sort of places like Essex. And he was absolutely right. It had, I think, more electoral effect than any other single measure that first government of hers took. And it really lost the Labour Party great swathes of support on the places where they'd always been able to confident to be able to keep it, which was on the council estates.
It was an authentic application of their belief, their ideology, their doctrine at the time, but it also had enormous immediate electoral benefits.
Next came the budget on the 12th of June. Income tax was the big headline, and the shift from direct to indirect taxation. The basic rate was cut from 33 to 30%, and the top rate from 83 to 60%. To make up the shortfall, VAT was increased.
Everyone recognised we had to make this big change in the shape as much as the size of taxes. It was a great blessing we had. And if you take tax policy in particular, in every speech I made in opposition, I ended a paragraph by saying, pay as you spend is better than pay as you earn. It always got a round of applause. And in my very first budget, I reduced the top rates of income tax a lot. I knocked 3/4 off income tax, but I almost doubled value-added tax.
In addition, the government announced a £3.5 billion cut in public spending.
I think that some of our colleagues, and indeed even we, didn't realise just how tough it was going to be. But the condition that was always dominant, if we were borrowing money still in order to finance expenditure we couldn't afford, we had to pay interest rates to borrow it. And the market wouldn't let us borrow more except at higher interest rates. So we had to follow monetary policy by reducing our borrowing. It was really, there is no alternative.
Geoffrey Howe's first budget would pave the way for monetarism in Britain.
It was a huge nominal change, and that meant that everything went up in price, and that meant that wages went up because everything was still very stratified. And it caused all sorts of problems with the exchange rate and with public spending, and it undoubtedly contributed to the difficulties. And there was quite a row about that within the cabinet before it happened, and there was unhappiness about it